This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Yeah, we want to get home ice, and best case scenario, we want to finish first. But for us, we did what we set up to do beginning of the year, is to make the playoffs, and we've accomplished that. And now we, have the destiny in our own hands to get home ice. And we're playing, Buffalo, Detroit. We two young teams that are really, becoming better teams, and then we got Florida. So, for us, we just got to keep elevating our game and make sure that we're ready to go when the fun starts next weekend.
The fun does start next weekend. Man, I can't wait. How about you, partner? It's just, everybody says the dog days of the hockey season is, January, February, maybe even a little later than that. But I feel like now, where I know we're ramping up, but man, it's like pulling teeth these last 5-6 games when the Lightning are in and they are battling.
I mean, there is still some intrigue though, as far as are the Lightning to get home ice? Who are they going to play in the first round? I can actually give the back of the napkin math. It's probably not even back of the napkin math because it's pretty straightforward.
Well, it's one thing about a team. Everybody's willing and everybody will.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Coop was responding to you.
Coop wants to hear the back of the napkin math. So Toronto, Tampa Bay, Florida, 1, 2, and 3. Florida won last night. Florida doesn't play tonight. Lightning have a 1-point lead with a game in hand. They are still in good shape to win that first tiebreaker, but they are going to need to get some. They're going to need to do some damage with regulation wins. So people might be wondering, is there any way that the Lightning could see the Leafs in the first round? It is unlikely. If Toronto wins one of its 4 remaining games in regulation, Florida cannot get into first. The Lightning could, but Florida can't catch Toronto if the Leafs get one regulation win out of their last 4, which would mean that the only way the Lightning could play Toronto is if they fall into the first wild card. And the only way that's going to happen is if they fail to register a point and Ottawa wins out. So I would say right now, unless you believe that Toronto is not going to pick up a regulation win in its last 4 games, the odds are certainly way more favorable that the Lightning will play somebody other than Toronto in the first round, and more likely than not, Florida, unless the Lightning can catch Toronto, that's probably the greatest probability of all of these different scenarios. But the Lightning are going to have to make up 3 points, as we talked about. And if they can't get 4 points ahead, in other words, make up 4 points, and they only can make up 3, they're going to have to win that regulation win tiebreaker, which is doable. But they're going to have to take care of business, as I've been saying for the last week. So, I mean, I'm kind of looking at that. I know you're like, just wake me up when the playoffs start almost. Also, how many games is Vasilevsky going to play down the stretch in the final 4? He's playing tonight. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Jonas Johansson gets the Buffalo game on Sunday.
Yeah.
I would expect Vasi to play the home game against Florida. And then we talked about that game 82. Who knows?
It's almost like if that game doesn't mean anything, what do you do?
If it doesn't mean anything and the Lightning know they're coming right back home, that would be the other part of it.
Sure.
Would they just leave Vasilevsky, and he'd be looking at, if the Lightning starts Saturday, Sunday, if he gets the Tuesday game, that's a 3 to 4 day break for him. That might make sense. But if the game has significance, game 82, maybe Vasilevsky plays that game.
The interesting thing is, how do you determine if a game still means significance, is of significance to the point where it's worth playing your starting goaltender that last game? Because quite frankly, if he's not in his best form, it doesn't matter where you're starting. It almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. So
let me take the inverse. The inverse would be if the Lightning are locked in, and there's no way they can go up or down, then that game has no significance.
None.
So then you definitely, if you're going to entertain the idea of not bringing Vasilevsky at all, then that helps you make that decision. what does significance mean? Is it the difference between finishing first and finishing in second? Understanding Toronto also plays that night. So you may not get your answers. It's not like as straightforward as if we win this game, we get first. They're going to have to make that determination. If it's the difference between, because Florida will be done, if the Lightning, let's say, are a point behind Florida heading into game 82, they're like, if we get a point or two out of this game, we get home ice, that to me would be significant.
Yeah.
That would fit the definition of what you spelled out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If it is Florida, they're resting their players towards the end of the regular season here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to be interesting. I think for them, it doesn't matter where they start. They want a healthy roster. Whether they have that to start the playoffs, I think that remains to be seen. They're trying to get there. And I actually think if you had to look at this objectively, based off of this year, if you feel like based off of this year means more than previous years, does Tampa Bay and Florida, is that a better matchup for the Lightning than Toronto this year?
Yeah. I mean, you mean as compared to last year?
Yeah, compared to last year, just in general, just the way things are playing out this year, do we feel like whether you're at home or away to start a series against the Panthers, do you feel a little bit better about your chances, even though that's a tough draw, than Lightning and Maple Leafs to start things off in the first round this year, based off of how things have transpired with the Leafs?
Yeah, so I'll answer it two ways. First of all, I think the Lightning are better equipped this year than they were last year for all the things that we've talked about throughout the year on the show, what we've seen from the Lightning. I don't know that I'm a big believer that the Lightning have a better matchup against one team or the other, even though their record it's already been better against Florida than it's been against Toronto. But I mean, I got to be consistent about what I was saying yesterday on the show, which is I don't think you can read too much into a regular season series when trying to predict what's going to happen in a playoff series.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean,
this maybe isn't a great example. I gave a couple where the Lightning had a good regular season record against their playoff opponent and then lost the series. Here's one that's the opposite. You might remember this, Greg. The Lightning played the Devils in the first round of 2018, that playoff year. Remember, Taylor Hall was leading the Devils. He won the Hart Trophy that year, deservedly so. Devils went 3-0 against the Lightning in that regular season series, and there was a lot of chatter about that heading into that series. And the Lightning they just manhandled them. I mean, they won the series in 5. So, again, this is a different situation. I think the Devils were a little bit of an upstart team that year when we're looking at Lightning Maple Leafs, and the Leafs won all 4. Toronto's one of the best teams in the NHL, but I'm not sure how much you can read into what happened in that regular season series and say, well, the Lightning are going to be at a disadvantage if they have to play Toronto as opposed to Florida. If the Lightning are in the 2-3 and Toronto is in the 1, if you presume that Toronto is going to get past the first round series, then for the Lightning to get out of this division, they're going to have to beat both teams. So I think that there may be something. So I'm not going to really get into. Let me back up. I think the Lightning are better equipped this year than last year because you kind of brought up these two. Like, are they? In a situation where you feel better against Florida than Toronto, and Florida this year as opposed to Florida last year. I think the Lightning are a better team this year, no matter who they play.
I would agree with that.
I think that it's going to be a tough series whether they play the Panthers or the Maple Leafs. That is a given. So we'll kind of take it from there. Unfortunate that Glendening got hurt. Remember that happened last year right at the end of the regular season. And, he did appear in the 5 playoff games the Lightning had last year, but he was affected by that injury, and it sounds like he's going to miss the rest of the regular season. So when you talked about the Panthers resting guys, they want to make sure that they're healthy. The Lightning, unfortunately, have been bitten by the injury bug. And again, looking back through the years, it has been strange how many times, and usually in different years, a significant player has had something happen literally in the last week of the regular season heading into the playoffs. The one year it was Stamkos and Anton Strawman. 2016. Stamkos had the blood clot, which was unrelated to anything that happened on the ice, but it took him out of the playoffs until Game 7 of the conference final against Pittsburgh. And Stralman broke his leg in the last week of the regular season. Go back a couple of years before that, Ben Bishop gets hurt in the final week of the regular season. That was in that 2014 playoff year. And they didn't have him for the playoffs, even though, you can make the argument he was one of the most important players in that 13-14 season. And here's another one that people kind of just don't really talk about, but it had significance. Victor Hedman got hurt in the final week of the regular season in the 18-19 year.
True. Yeah.
And he was not himself. And he played the first 2 games, was not himself, and they held him out of games 3 and 4. The Lightning were also without Girardi, although that was not in the final week of the regular season. He ended up having an injury. I think he got a staph infection, and it took time to heal up. And that was the end of his career. I don't think Girardi played after that second year with the Lightning. So these last few games in the regular season, I mean, we've seen guys, and last year Glendening. Now, Glendening played in the playoffs, but I think he wasn't 100%. So hopefully he'll be able to heal up in the next week plus and be ready to go once the playoffs begin.
Just goes to show.
I know I kind of jumped around there, Greg.
No, but I mean, I think it speaks to a bigger picture there when we talk about home ice, playing well. Some of it is, maybe a lot of it is just, are you healthy? I mean, it is. If you feel like your team is one of the best teams in the league, with all the experience the Lightning have accumulated over the years, you should theoretically look at it and say, playoffs are a different cat. Yeah, we've struggled a little bit on the road this year in the regular season, but we feel pretty confident once the postseason hits, we're going to be there. And so if that's the case and that's the mindset, it doesn't really matter how you finish. It's, are you healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I have discussed this. The playoffs, completely different game, completely different animal than the regular season. And we have said about this Lightning team over the last 5-6 years, they can flip a switch and play pretty well. I mean, would it surprise anybody if the Lightning in this postseason, whether they play just 2 games in this postseason or they play a lot more because they go deeper into the playoffs, would we be surprised if the Lightning ended up being a pretty good road team? I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I would look at it and say, this is a really good team who happened to really figure some things out that needed to be figured out on the road. And they've got an elite goaltender who's playing at a pretty high level. I wouldn't be surprised compared to what we've seen in the regular season.
If you can defend, and the Lightning have shown that they can defend, they've defended better at home than on the road, which is why their home record is better than their road record. But if you can defend, that is a recipe for success on the road in the playoffs.
100%.
It is.
100%. And if you feel the Lightning have defended well this year for the most part, then you should feel pretty good. Am I frozen? I was frozen there for a minute. Did you see that? I had my
you were frozen on my laptop, but I'm not sure. When I'm in studio, I'm not actually recording through my laptop. I'm recording on this camera right here. But so I wasn't sure if that was just me or
I've done this before.
Everyone.
When you
froze.
when I'm doing meetings with my PR team, and it freezes the camera. Sometimes I'll take a screenshot and have fun with it because
you go from a reel to a post. See, I'm learning all this lingo because I'm doing all the blind squirrel posting and reels.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm learning, getting an education.
Do you like doing the reels?
Look, this is not my wheelhouse. So I'm just kind of like bumbling my way through it.
Are you a blind squirrel?
Usually if I put Stella in a video, if I put Stella in a video, people are going to be like, oh, look at the dog. So I mean,
exactly it.
Yeah. I got a little experience with like the speech bubbles, right? Like
there you go.
I did a little bit of that.
Yeah.
What I have to figure out, and somebody is probably going to write into the show, like every video that I watch on social media has closed captions now. And I have to find a way to get closed captions on the reels because that's just the way it's done now. So if you're in a spot where you can't play the volume,
right,
because you don't have headphones or earbuds or whatever, and you're not by yourself, you can watch a video and read the closed caption. You know what we've done? This is total non sequitur, and then we're going to get back to the Lightning and Detroit tonight, which is right on the brink. We can also get into like clinching scenarios for Montreal because they exist tonight
They do.
My daughter actually got us all hooked on this when we watch television or a movie as a family.
Yeah.
But she has a TV in her room and she got into this and she's like, I really like this. She watches television with the volume low with closed captions on.
Nice.
And
yeah,
you might think that that's distracting or, seeing the words
it's not
somehow takes away from the delivery of the spoken words, but it actually doesn't. So when we watch a show now or a movie, a lot of times we'll put on the closed captions. So I've become a fan of closed captions.
Yeah, that's smart.
Anyway, the last thing I'll say about the matchups, like you have talked about, this is really about the Panthers, but what you've talked about with the Lightning during that time, they won a cup, they went back to back, they got to the final. You're like, they have enough experience. Their regular season finish is not that important. They will find another gear in the playoffs. And if you remember, they got blown out at Florida in the final game of that 2021 regular season, the 56-game season, in advance of playing the Panthers. They actually surrendered home ice. They went to Florida for 2 road games, lost both, and lost home ice basically in the first round.
Yeah.
But they won the series. So you're like, all right, well, it didn't matter. That's kind of where Florida is right now. Florida's like, yeah, we got to the final. We won a cup. We won as the team with home ice advantage. We've won as the team without home ice advantage. We got this. What we saw from the Lightning in 2021, that playoff year, and 2022, they were probably forgetting the final in 2022 because they were really banged up and Colorado was ready to win that cup. But you could make the argument the Lightning in some ways were at their most vulnerable in the first round. Like I'm not disagreeing with you about the flipping of the switch in that an experienced team that knows how to win in the playoffs can kind of summon that right when they need to. But I think if you look at the 2 series the Lightning had in 2021 against Florida and 2022 against Toronto in the first round, they were not as sharp as they were later in the playoffs. So as it relates to Florida, if you're going to say we need to get past Florida, if we're in the Atlantic, if you believe the road goes through the defending champs, we need to beat Florida at some point. Would you rather see Florida in the first round or later? Now, you might say, I'd rather not see Florida at all. I'd rather, maybe avoid them in the first round and have, in this case, Toronto beat Florida. Well, then you'd be seeing Toronto, and we get into those discussions. So, look, no series is going to be easy. There's no easy path to get all the way to the end of the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there may be something to the fact that just look at where Florida is at right now. They've had guys injured. Ekblad going to miss the first 2 games of the playoffs. Matthew Tkachuk may be coming in cold after missing, every game since the 4 Nations ended. Bennett is going to miss some time at the end of the year. This doesn't mean that they're going to come into the playoffs and not be ready. They're going to be ready. But it is possible that their game isn't going to quite be where it will get to. Like if Florida, you don't see Florida in the first round, you're the Lightning, Florida wins that round, how much stronger is Florida going to be in round 2? Because we kind of saw that with the Lightning. Look at the round 2 victories the Lightning had in those 2 years. They got past Florida in 2021. I know they won it in 6, but there were some games. I mean, the Lightning were not good defensively in that series at the beginning. They leaned heavily on Vasilevsky. And the Panthers didn't have a Vasilevsky to lean on. Remember, they used the 3 goalies in 6 games. By the time the Lightning got to round 2, they absolutely suffocated Carolina. 2022, what happened?
Right.
They get past Toronto in the first round. They sweep Florida in the second round. I mean, they weren't perfect in all of those games, but they were a lot better, I think,
Mm-hmm.
by round 2. And they had a rough start. They had the long layoff before they saw the Rangers in the conference final, if you remember that, because they had swept Florida. And they didn't start that series well. But once it got to game 3, I mean, they just clamped it down. The Rangers did not score an even strength goal in the final 4 games of that series. So when we look at how the Lightning did it, I mean, this is kind of where I'm going because you asked me about like the matchups. And I think if you were to ask me, I mean, is Florida beatable in round 2? Of course. Florida might have injuries. And that's the other thing. As you go deeper in the playoffs, you tend to have more bumps and bruises. You might lose some players that are really significant. But just based on where they are, they're 2 deep runs. They're kind of connect the dots, but not be exceptional in the regular season. They did what they needed to do to get in the playoffs, Florida. They've had some good stretches. They've had some less good stretches. You know, they go into the playoffs. They're like, okay, we're ready to go back to back. I think it's a gradual elevation. I don't think it's automatic. That's kind of what I'm saying. But as the Lightning showed, you can have that happen and still win a series. You can beat the opponent even as you're kind of figuring things out.
I think that's fair. By the way, did you read this? Steve sent it to both of us here.
Yeah, not until Steve sent it. I didn't know it.
The Leafs only have 5 healthy defensemen available for tomorrow's game against Montreal because Oliver Ekman-Larsson is injured. He's listed as day-to-day.
That has to be related to the cap, too, because they could call up a defenseman.
Yeah, they're only going with 5, right?
Yeah, they only have 5 healthy, and they have no way of calling up a defenseman. I'm guessing that it's cap related.
Yeah. Banged up a little bit.
McCabe is hurt. We heard that from Luke Fox, that McCabe has been out. Look, I mean, I don't know how serious these injuries are, but that's probably not ideal for Toronto to have, some defensemen banged up.
One of their top defensemen out.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll keep an eye on that. No doubt. Do you want to
let me just run.
What do you want to get into?
Yeah, let me just give you the other end of the spectrum as far as the second wild card and the teams that are chasing. So 5 teams for 1 spot. That's been the case for a couple of weeks now. All 5 of those teams, well, all 4 of the teams other than Montreal are still mathematically alive, but 3 of them are alive by literally the skin of their teeth. 1 point gained by Montreal, and Montreal's at Ottawa tonight.
Right.
If the Canadiens gain a point, that will eliminate the Rangers, the Red Wings, and the Islanders. Now, the Rangers and Islanders do not play tonight. The Red Wings, of course, do. So if Detroit does not win the game tonight, then they will be eliminated. I mean, if Montreal loses, doesn't get a point, Detroit would need 2 points. So there's no margin for error for those 3 teams. They need to win out, and they have to have Montreal lose out. Columbus is the other team. Columbus can get to 89 points. Montreal is at 87. Columbus is the one team, though, that Montreal has an inside track to win the tiebreaker. In fact, they only need 1 regulation win, and Columbus is going to lose that tiebreaker. So that's why I said, I said it to Steve before we went on the air, if Montreal wins tonight in regulation, Columbus isn't playing. Columbus will be eliminated.
Right.
So a win tonight for Montreal in regulation ends this race. Montreal getting 1 point will eliminate 3 of the 4 teams chasing them. And Columbus is basically on the brink. So that's where things stand. In the East. The West is a little more complicated. You have fewer teams still in the race. Vancouver is basically done. Vancouver needs to win out and have one of the 2 wild card teams lose out. But Calgary still has a path because Calgary has an extra game on Minnesota and 2 extra games on Seattle. 5 points back of both teams. Minnesota and St. Louis are tied, and Calgary has a head-to-head with Minnesota tonight. Right. So it is possible, unlikely, but possible for Calgary to make up some ground, but they're going to really need to get going. 5 points with only 4 games left is a lot. But they have the benefit of a head-to-head against one of the teams, and one of the other teams only has 2 games left.
Right.
So we may have the 8 teams in the East and the 8 teams in the West, though, settled.
Disappointing for, I think, Detroit.
By the time tomorrow morning comes around. Very disappointing for Detroit.
Not as disappointing as the Rangers and what they're dealing with here, but I think Detroit and teams like Buffalo, look, we talked about this with like Ottawa and the Devils, teams knocking on the door, the Devils, looking like they can find some ways here. Buffalo hasn't been able to get out of their own way. What is it, 14 consecutive years now missing the playoffs, which is just,
Yeah.
I mean, that is
And they've been super
unbelievable.
hot. I mean, they lost at
Yeah.
Columbus last night where they had a 2-0 lead, but they've been playing really, really well. Detroit's the opposite.
Yeah.
Detroit was in the race. And what killed Detroit, at least at the end of the year, 4-10 in March. I mean,
it's incredible.
If you're going to go 4-10 in March, you want to make the playoffs, you better have a pretty big lead in the standings.
For sure.
And Detroit was just in the mix, right? And they go 4-10. Now, a lot of the teams around them were kind of mezza too, except for Montreal. Montreal got hot.
Incredible. I mean, you start talking about disappointing years, and I know people can be critical if the Lightning don't go too far in the playoffs, and that's considered a disappointing year. How would you like to be one of those teams that just can't figure it out? And I think that's a shame. And we've seen Detroit at their best. They're a pretty good team when things are clicking.
Mm-hmm.
And they have just not been able to put it together. And, we'll see what type of effort is put forth tonight. I think that's hard when the chances of you not winning and getting into the playoffs, especially at the end of the year. We see some teams like Buffalo playing loosey-goosey. Curious to see what Detroit plays like tonight.
I mean, here's my diagnosis, and I won't say postmortem yet because the Red Wings still are mathematically alive, but they had a great power play this year. It's one of the best power plays in the NHL. The Lightning have seen that. I mean, even when Detroit has not scored, Detroit has been dangerous, and Detroit has been helped. I'm not sure this is sustainable. We talked about their special teams differential. Like, they get a lot of power plays, and they aren't shorthanded very much. I was actually looking in the 3 games the teams have played. The Red Wings have had 11 power play chances, and the Lightning have had only 5. Which is on brand for Detroit, right? Detroit draws a lot of penalties. Mm-hmm. Their power play gets a lot of reps. And by comparison, they aren't shorthanded nearly as much. So their power play is in very good shape. Now, what's the future of Patrick Kane? Is he going to come back for another year? Unknown. But much of the rest of the group that they have, like, they aren't going anywhere. Dylan Larkin's not going anywhere. Lucas Raymond's not going anywhere. Alex DeBrincat's not going anywhere. Sider's not going anywhere. Like, their power play is a good power play, and I think they can rely on that moving forward. It's everything else. Their 5-on-5 numbers are not good. They're underwater, and their penalty kill, the only thing that's helped their penalty kill is they haven't been shorthanded a lot, but they're dead last in penalty kill percentage. So it's a more extreme version of what the Lightning dealt with last year, because the Lightning didn't have a penalty kill that was 32nd. But we talked about them needing to get better defensively specifically 5-on-5. That's where the Red Wings are. The Red Wings need to get better defensively. And people, it's very easy to just say, the goalie. They don't have a goalie. Steve actually said to me, I'm not picking on Steve, but Steve was like, they don't have a goalie. All right, fair enough. But, the goalies that they have, like, Cam Talbot has had good years in the NHL playing in front or with certain teams in front of him, right? So, and Alex Lyon has had very strong moments in his NHL career, but clearly, maybe it's not clearly, but the Red Wings made a deal at the deadline with Chicago to bring back Peter Mrazek. I mean, Peter Mrazek, I remember when he was playing for the Red Wings. Yeah. When the Lightning and Red Wings met in the 2015 playoffs, he was part of that Grand Rapids team that beat Syracuse in 2013. He's been around a long time. He is not going to be their goalie of the future. No. So the Red Wings need to crack that nut for sure. Yeah. And why did Chicago trade Mrazek? In part because they acquired Spencer Knight, right, in the Seth Jones deal. So Knight is now Chicago's guy, and they're like, we'll move Mrazek. They got Joe Veleno, who was another, he was a late first-round pick, but the Red Wings have had first-round picks. If you take out Seider, you take out Raymond, and you take out Simon Edvinsson, who's a very good player. He's a good young player. They have not really connected on a lot of their first-round picks. Now, Veleno, I think, was like a 30th overall, but still, it was a first-round pick.
Where were those first-round picks, too? That's the other thing, because I do think in hockey, maybe and baseball's probably similar.
Yeah.
Beyond like the 10th pick or 12th pick,
They've
it
had
is a little
those
bit of a
though
crapshoot.
too.
Yeah.
And maybe they've been like singles instead
Right.
of a big hitter. But I mean, if you're picking 8th overall and the player is a
You got to hit on
single,
that. Yeah, you got to hit on that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where they've been at. So again, we'll see what happens tonight. I thought the Red Wings had a terrible game in their first game here, which was the first meeting between the teams, and they were actually on a long winning streak. I think they were playing well, and the Lightning just hammered them.
Yeah.
The second meeting, that was a goalie steal. If you remember, the Lightning lost 2-0. They had all those chances and couldn't put the puck in the net. But Vasilevsky was really, really good in that game too. And then the final meeting, the Lightning jumped out to a big lead on Lyon, who had played really well against them in the previous game. But the Red Wings were dangerous. I mean, the Red Wings have been dangerous offensively in the last 2 games between the teams. We'll see what happens tonight. But that's kind of where they're at, right? Like, they have a lot of skill and they can make plays. They just struggle defensively.
Which is something the Lightning have kind of
That's
figured
my
out a bit.
point, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So the Red Wings need
really
to figure that out, just like New Jersey figured it out this year. New Jersey did. Why is New Jersey in the playoffs? New Jersey's in the playoffs because the Devils have really improved defensively. Yeah. I'm actually going to open the numbers right now and look at goals allowed per game. New Jersey Devils are 6th in goals allowed per game. You know where they were last year? I'm going to tell you.
Not there.
No. So the Lightning were tied for 22nd. We mentioned that. The Devils were 26th. Tied for 26th.
That's a dramatic
They've gone from
jump.
Tied for 26th to 6th. Now, is it simple as they got Jacob Markstrom? Well, he's helped, but remember, he's been out for a portion of the year. New coach.
So that gets back to my question.
Dougie Hamilton came back, right? Luke Hughes is now a year older. I mean, I think it's a variety of things, but teams have to figure this out.
Is that the biggest jump?
Well, the Lightning went from 22nd to 3rd.
That's what I mean. That's think about it.
So they were
two
comparable.
Two teams who are in the 20s defensively last year in terms of what goals allowed.
Mm-hmm.
They're now in the top 10, and they're both in the playoffs.
So check this out, Greg. I'm looking at this for the first time in a while right now. I'm going to give you the top 16 defensive teams in the NHL, top half.
Right now, the top
16. From 1 to 16 right
Okay.
now.
Yep.
Let's count how many of them are playoff teams.
Go ahead.
Understanding that we basically know who the playoff teams are going to be,
sure.
barring something weird happening with Calgary in the West and Montreal having a total collapse, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
Let's do it.
Winnipeg Jets, playoff team.
Yep.
LA Kings, playoff team. Tampa Bay Lightning, playoff team. Dallas Stars, playoff team. Vegas, playoffs. New Jersey, playoffs. Florida, playoffs. Washington, playoffs. Carolina, playoffs. Ottawa, 10th, playoffs. Those are your top 10.
Here. 10 for 10.
11, Colorado, playoffs. 12, St. Louis, likely playoffs. 13, Toronto. It's actually a little low. I'm surprised Toronto is 13th, but Toronto, 13th, playoffs. 14th, Minnesota, likely playoffs. 15th, Edmonton, playoffs. 15 out of 15. Number 16, Calgary. They are the one team, and they are the closest to getting into the playoffs of all the teams that are not. So the one team that is on path to get into the playoffs that is not in the top half, Montreal, 24th. 24th.
That's awful.
And that is awful, but how much of that was in the first half of the year?
And maybe that's a case too where a team's starting to play well at the end, and this is where that maybe, but that's the exception. That's a little bit of the exception.
Look at it's not always 16 for 16.
No, but that's
like Columbus might have gotten in, and Columbus would have gotten in because they score a lot, right?
You know what would be interesting?
But look, if you can defend, you have a path to the playoffs in the regular season. I'm talking about.
What is the metric?
15 out of 16.
I mean, that's impressive. I actually think that's more impressive than what's the cutoff line for you? 96 points.
Yeah.
And it's not just you, but I know you
safe.
mentioned is
We're going to
safe.
see
And
teams get in this year in the low 90s for sure.
Montreal, probably, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Ottawa, most likely, unless they win the remaining 4 games. That would put them at 98. The
Right.
Devils, probably not at 89. But I'm wondering.
Well, you're talking about getting to 96?
Yeah, getting to 90. Like, is 96, you get to that number, you're pretty much in.
Right.
Right. And what I'm saying is that's a really good barometer. But the one we just did, if you're in the top 15 defensively, I know that's not like that every year, to your point, but I think that would be a little bit more telling. Like, we'd have to go back and do some research. Jared, can you do that?
Well, it's not complicated because you can look at the end of the year. Now,
Yeah.
last year, I just told you the Lightning made the playoffs. They were tied for 22nd. So they were on the wrong side of the goals allowed bar, but they got in the playoffs. But I've said it, you've said it, and you've agreed with me that they are a better team this year. They are better equipped to do damage in the playoffs. Not that they couldn't have won a playoff round last year. They happened to get the eventual champs in the first round who were playing really, really well. It's not that the Lightning had a terrible team last year, but they leaned on their power play and they kind of leaned on their offense. Kuch had 100 assists last year. They had a hard time keeping the puck out of their own net, and most of playoff hockey is played 5-on-5. So based on the numbers, you can see that they seem better equipped this year. Does it mean that they are not going to go out in the first round? No, they may go out in the first round. They're going to have a tough opponent. Clearly, they're going to have an opponent that is also in the top half defensively, right?
That's true. It would be interesting looking at that stat about goals allowed, where you rank as a team is muddling along throughout the regular season. To me, that would be a pretty interesting take. Mm-hmm. Hey, look, Greg, we've seen over the last 5 years, teams that have made the playoffs typically have been in the top 15 in goals allowed. And you kind of see a team that's wavering a little bit. You're like, look, that's got to change. Exceptions to every rule. We know that. But, I mean, it speaks to everything. Defense wins championships.
Right. And that's going to be – so there's the challenge for the Detroits and the Buffaloes and these teams that – like they show signs, right? And even on a different scale, 2 teams I mentioned in the West that I think are trending in the right direction, right. Utah and Anaheim, they're going to have to figure that out too because they are in the bottom half defensively.
That's true. You want to get some questions here? We've got them.
Let's do it.
Nick on YouTube, let's start with him. With Glendening missing the rest of the regular season, could we see Jack Finley get the recall? Great face-off, right-handed center, something we need for a few games.
I would say no, Nick. And the reason I say no is the cap situation. I mean, we talked about this as a related to Isaac Howard, which apparently the reason that the contract didn't get done with Isaac Howard had less to do. I mean, reports are indicating less to do with the Lightning's tight cap situation, more about like, where would he play? I'm not going to get into that because we don't have any firsthand information about that. By firsthand, I mean people telling us. So I guess that would be secondhand. But if you're hearing it on the air, it would be firsthand. But the cap situation remains the same. The Lightning have very little room, and they have right now 2 extra forwards if they keep an 11-7 lineup configuration. One of them is Mitchell Chaffee, who's been in and playing, right? He was in for Gensel last game, but it looks like Gensel's going to be okay to return to the lineup tonight. And so Chaffee presumably would be in for Glendening, who actually missed the game at Islanders for the birth of his child. So they already made that swap once, and the other guys came Atkinson. So I understand where Nick is going, like right-handed centerman, but at this point, this late stage in the regular season, the Lightning just don't have the cap room, I think, to easily call up a player from Syracuse. By the way, not yet congratulations to Syracuse, but the Crunch have been on a bit of a run, and they've really solidified their position in the standings. It looks like they're well on their way to clinching a playoff berth. We'll see where they finish. But as it relates to the Lightning, I would think the Lightning are going to have all those guys in Syracuse stay in Syracuse to help Syracuse do well in the playoffs. Unless there's like a rash of injuries at the start of the Lightning's playoff series, and they need to summon reinforcements. Missing Glendening, though, is going to, like, the impact will be felt on specifically defensive zone faceoffs to the right of Andrei Vasilevsky.
Yeah.
And, to the extent that Nick is like, wow, I'm looking at Syracuse, who's a right-handed centerman, Jack Finley. Okay, but Jack Finley, and it's nothing on him. Luke Glendening is one of the best faceoff guys in the NHL, and he's been in the NHL for a dozen years plus, right? To ask Jack Finley to do what Luke Glendening has done is just not fair to Finley. I mean, they wouldn't ask him of that. 5-on-6, the other team's pulled the goalie, draw to the right of Vasilevsky. Lightning are sending out Luke Glendening to win that faceoff. If they had Jack Finley, they wouldn't be sending Jack Finley out to take that faceoff. Not yet, anyway. Not at this point in his career. So the Lightning are really down to one righty that can take faceoffs, and that's Braden Point. Unless they're going to have a guy take it on his weak side, which Yanni Gourde tried to do against Tavares, and on the nice power play goal, Tavares won the draw cleanly. Seconds later, it was in the Lightning's net.
Something to keep an eye on. Look, we've talked about faceoffs in the playoffs. Glendening is somebody who is a guy who can do it, and we'll see. We'll see how this lingers. Andrew on Facebook says, "What current line trio do you think most resembles the Goodrow, Gourde, Coleman line that will be tasked with the most difficult matchups?"
I don't think the Lightning have a line quite like that one. I think the matchup line will be Cirelli and Hagel. And I don't know that we know who the third guy is. I think the security blanket guy is Nick Paul, in that he's played a lot with those guys. Coop trusts him, and he knows he can do the job. But when you're putting Nick Paul on that line, then you're taking Nick Paul off the third line, which is kind of always the rub here with Yanni Gourde. Yanni Gourde can play center on the third line, as he did in the Cup years with Goodrow and Coleman. So I don't know. I liked Gonçalves on that line against Toronto with Hagel and Cirelli, but Gage Gonçalves does not have a lot of experience in that role at the NHL level. And we're talking about entering a playoff series where Hagel and Cirelli are going to be out against pick your poison. Against Florida, it's probably the Barkov line. Against Toronto, it's the Matthews line. That is a major assignment.
Do you dare put Gergensons there? Because we have seen it.
Yeah, we've seen it. I think we would have seen it more down the stretch.
Not telling you I would do it. I'm just saying, if you're he asked the question, who most resembles that line? I tend to agree with you. But if you're asking me the question, which he is, I will say Hagel, Cirelli.
Yeah.
And then somebody else. It's a better offensive line for sure, but there's grit there too. So you have that combination.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question, though, that I've asked before. And I think maybe we're getting that answer. The reason we wanted to see some depth scoring come in was to alleviate the pressure of Hagel and Cirelli having to take those top assignments. But, partner, I think Cirelli and Hagel are not only going to be relied upon to score as a second line, I think they're going to have to defend.
Yeah.
As a shutdown line. And I'm wondering, is that too much of an ask in the playoffs for them? Because
no, it's what they've done all
out.
year. Oh, I don't think it's too much of an ask. Look, when the Lightning have last change, you can mark it down. Cirelli and Hagel are going out against the other team's top line with Chernak and McDonough. I do not know who the third forward is going to be. It could be Nick Paul. It could be Gage Gonçalves. It could be Zemgus Girgensons. I mean, we're going to see if Glendening, at least in the regular season, as we round out these last 4 games, without Glendening, Girgensons is a center. He may play center on the fourth line with 2 forwards with Chafee. If the Lightning go with that 11-7 lineup configuration, and we'll see if Gage Gonçalves stays with Hagel and Cirelli. I will point this out. Bjorkstrand and Gourde have experience playing together, and they played together a fair amount since the trade. They also have experience playing together in that role with Seattle. The 1 year Seattle got to the playoffs and beat Colorado, the defending champs, in the first round. Now, the third guy in that line was Eeli Tolvanen. Ellie Tolvanen is not on the Tampa Bay Lightning, but Gordon Bjorkstrand could team up with Nick Paul. So if the Lightning don't get last change, you know, I mean, we don't know what the other team is going to do. Maybe the other team is going to match the top line against the point line. But it's good to have a plan B in case, you know, you can't get Surly and Hagel out in the matchup that you want. And it's probably something that John Cooper likes. He knows he has this and he likes it, that he has Gordon Bjorkstrand as a duo that have done this before at a very high level against a powerhouse opponent. Because if you're playing Colorado and you're tasked with being the shutdown line, you know who you're seeing. I mean, you're not seeing their fourth line. You're seeing McKinnon. And they met the challenge. They won the series.
I agree. I mean, I think everything you said there is spot on. I'm curious who they trust in that next line mate for Cirelli.
Right.
And
you're wondering, would they try Gergens? I mean, look, they'll try anything. If they start a series and it's not going well, Cooper is not one to let moss grow. Right. I mean, he's gonna try other combinations.
I think it's interesting, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest areas to watch, I think, in that first round, especially. Thomas on X says, is there any fear that these matchups are getting a bit stale? Up until this season, it's been some fashion of the Lightning, Boston, Toronto, Florida in the playoffs. I'd love to see the Canes, Tampa Bay, or Devils, Tampa Bay matchup. Variety is the spice of life, as they say.
Thomas, Gary Bettman vehemently disagrees with you. And that is where this conversation matters, right? Begins and ends. Because I think that there is some sentiment in line with Thomas's sentiment around the league, and maybe even from some general managers. But Gary Bettman's like, no, I like this format. So I'll say this. If it does, like if the playoffs started tonight, it would be Panthers, Lightning, Battle of Florida, Toronto, Ottawa, Battle of Ontario. Gary Bettman would be drooling over that in terms of like intrigue in the first round for matchups. But yes, it would not be, at least Lightning Panthers. How many times have they met in the playoffs? 2021, 2022,
yeah,
2024, and maybe a fourth time in the last 5 years if they meet in the first round.
I mean, I think the way things are set up in the NHL, I think like anything, and it's a little bit different, but it was meant to draw eyeballs and more intrigue. Just like the outdoor game, just like trying to spruce up the All-Star game, doing these type of matchups in the first round rather than go 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5. I think at some point they do have an expiration date. I do. I think you have to constantly find ways to either tinker or go back to how it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think people are going to look at this and say, okay, we get it. You want the first round to be meaningful. But as I told you before, if you've got a lot of parity in your game, which the NHL does, that first round matchup should be hard regardless. And I don't know if the Lightning playing the Panthers is going to drum up more interest locally or nationally compared to when it first happened.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
Well, so here is what I will say, not exactly contrary to Thomas's point and your point, because I'm down with anything. They want to go to 1-16. I mean, it'll be longer travel. They're not going to do that. But there was a time when the NHL basically had, I mean, they kind of had a play in, right? You go back and look in the late 70s, early 80s. There was one year, I think, Gretzky's first year in the NHL, they played the Flyers maybe in the first round in a best of three. Maybe it was a different team. I remember Brian Engblom said that they played the Oilers one year in a best of three and they got spanked. So this was after they had won their 4 straight cups. Anyway, that's not going to happen.
Sure.
You want to go to 1-8? Fine. I'm fine with that. You want to keep it the way it is? I'm fine with that too. I think if you're a Lightning fan, just be glad the Lightning are in the playoffs. Here is the reason we're seeing the same matchups, though, which is really the point that Thomas is making and that you are making. The reason we are seeing the same matchups in the Atlantic, to the extent in the other divisions, we have not seen enough shifting in terms of the playoff bound teams and the non-playoff bound teams. Like we just talked about Detroit and Buffalo, right? Like, who's new to the party? Well, Ottawa has not played Toronto in a playoff series since, and they played in 2004. Was that the last one? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's new.
Yeah.
I mean, they know each other, but they haven't played in a playoff series in a really long time. If Montreal can get in, play Washington, I mean, they met. I remember they famously upset the Caps one of the years the Caps won the President's Trophy. And then they ended up beating Pittsburgh in the second round. That was a pretty famous run by the Canadians. They had Halak in net when Price was a little younger, and they decided to stick with Price, which was a smart move. But Halak was the big reason why Montreal won that series. So Montreal's played Washington before, but it's been a really long time, and that's a crossover matchup anyway. So if some of these teams that have been stuck out of the playoffs can start to get in the playoffs, we will see different matchups with the same format. What has not happened is the teams that have been good have stayed good. The playoff teams have kept their hold on making the playoffs. This year, Boston is the exception, right? And the Rangers, presumably.
I mean, the Boston, up until about 3 years ago, you could make the case Boston, New York, even the Islanders, and Pittsburgh were teams that occupied at least 4 spots.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened.
Right. But I think when we start to see, I mean, I'm not sure it's going to happen, but if these lower seeded teams start to elevate, get in the playoffs, we'll start to see different playoff matchups. And that's kind of in the spirit of where the league wants to go. That's why, if you finish out of the playoffs, you get higher draft picks, right? You have a chance. The salary cap is designed to level the playing field a little bit so that, you shouldn't, if you can manage your team well and bring in the right players and develop them and with good coaching, eventually the teams that are near the bottom should move up. And then we'll start to see different matchups in the early rounds. I mean, back in the day, it was even more pronounced. The fact that there's been a Florida team in the Stanley Cup final for 5 straight years is a little unusual. But, look back at the dynasty years, how many times did the Oilers play the Islanders, when they were winning cups? And, the Canadians won 4 in a row, and they played the Bruins 2 of those years in the Stanley Cup final. That was a different sort of matchup, right? Where they were in the basically rivals, but they met in the Stanley Cup final just based on how they had the playoffs set up. So, even when things were not set up this way in terms of the format, the top teams tended to see each other later in the playoffs, by and large. We haven't seen it in the early rounds because the same teams are making the playoffs.
Anthony on X says, Isaac Howard was just on the Game Notes podcast, the Frozen Four, and he said, we didn't see eye to eye. I wasn't demanding NHL time right away. It just didn't work out.
Yeah.
Interesting. Don't know what that
Again, I'll maintain, just based on how the system is set up. I mean, it's not like he's going to become a UFA tomorrow. No. But I can understand why Lightning fans are very nervous about this.
They are nervous.
Yeah.
TBS sports fan, we don't have to expand on this. This is just information coming in. Said Isaac Howard says he wasn't in a situation where he was demanding to play in the NHL. Says he and Tampa Bay didn't see eye to eye. So that's exactly the same thing. That one said. Dustin says, good afternoon, gentlemen. I think no matter who we play in the first round, it would be best to have home ice at least to get us revving our playoff engine, as well as being confident in having the home ice advantage. I don't think this team should fear any opponent, but why would you not want the Panthers knowing that they are slightly banged up? And side note, letting Toronto go to war with Ottawa before you face either one.
It's hard to project, but was that Dustin who had that?
Dustin, that is correct.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about, not only about the Florida injuries, but, are they going to be able to elevate right away? The reason the negative to that rhetorical, like, why wouldn't you want, is that they are the defending Stanley Cup champs, and it is hard to knock out the champs. It's really hard to knock out the champs. I mean, look, Vegas last year.
Yeah.
Vegas was, I think they were wild card 2. They wild card 2? They were a wild card team, and they saw Dallas in the first round. They won the first 2 games in Dallas. I mean, it took a lot for Dallas to win that series. It's hard to beat the champs. We saw that with the Lightning. They were ravaged by injury. Colorado had some injuries too. I'm not discounting that, but Colorado was healthier from top to bottom than the Lightning were. And Colorado wasn't missing their equivalent of Braden Point and their equivalent of Anthony Cirelli for the second half of that series. And look at how, like, the Avs had to work extremely hard to knock out the Lightning. 1-goal games, overtime games. So that would be the reason that seeing the Panthers will give any opponent pause.
He also says, let me find it. This is no personal hatred to Sergachev or Stamkos, but with McDonough and Gensel, we are a net positive and plus minus combined at plus 61. And that's not including the chasm of Sergei and Stammers at negative. I'm extremely confident in this group, but I'm going to piggyback on what you both spoke about the past few weeks. McDonough should win the Norris for his play. And think about this. We were absolutely not the same team while he was gone in Nashville.
Well, I think we're in agreement, at least on that last part. I mean, I would love to see Ryan McDonough get votes for the Norris. I don't think that's going to happen. And I actually went on record saying, I think with Cale Makar hitting 30 goals for the first time since 2008, 2009, he should win the Norris. Because that is an extraordinary feat, and it should be acknowledged. But generally, like a defenseman who doesn't produce a lot of points, but does a lot of important work and a lot of heavy lifting to help his team win should get acknowledged. What did we just talk about with goals allowed per game? If you can keep the puck out of your net better than half of the league, the odds of you making the playoffs is very high. How do you keep the puck out of your net? Well, goaltending system, good roster, but having a defensive defenseman that draws those important assignments, penalty kill, 5-on-6, that's a big, big part of it. Not to mention what McDonough's return has done to Eric Chernak's game.
Which has been...
It's like a BOGO.
Another reason.
Right?
Yeah.
Not Zach Bogosian, but like, it's like the Lightning brought back McDonough and they almost, not that Chernak was subpar, but I mean, the comfort that he has with McDonough means that he's played his best hockey in a couple of years.
He has. We'll see if that continues tonight. Lightning and Red Wings partner 7:00, which means we'll be on the air at 6:30, and then you and I will be in this setting on Monday.
800th game for Kucherov, so congratulations in advance to him.
That'll be cool.
Yeah,
we'll see how it plays out, and I'll see you at the rink. Great week this week, and also see you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
We've got a lot of hockey here in a short period of time. Thanks, Steve Ersnick, Jared Johnston, and all of you for listening. I'm Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch right here on Lightning Radio.